Welcome to the polling station. And short of a United Ireland happening, this is pretty much my political ambitions fulfilled because we're going to talk Northern Ireland on the polling station. And it's one of the most exciting times of the year. Indeed, I was just having a nap on the couch there, and I was woken up by the sound of the first ice cream van of the summer. And it's not summer without a good Northern Ireland debate. Ahead of the marching season, we have the NI elections, the local elections. So we're going to have a good chat about that. We also have the Greek elections. We have a lot of madness in the US. And Paul Krishnamurty is basking in the sultry heat of Rhodes. How are you, Paul?
I'm good. I'm good. A little bit annoyed with myself that I let my principles get in the way of a good bet the other day on Erdogan because I had a strong feeling that that would happen and that the polls would be mysteriously wrong because you know how that never happens with like Putin's allies. Um, but I didn't have a bet for that reason, so a little bit annoyed about that, but otherwise all good.
How are you, William?
I'm very good. I'm excited about not just the upcoming elections we've got, but also the next year, 2024. I haven't looked forward to a year in years, but as Sam Coates pointed out earlier today, we will have a general election in the UK, the presidential election in the US, and all that goes with it, and EU parliamentary elections. Just three of the things to look forward to next year. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, William is like a pig in you know what. Now, William, we are going to talk NI politics here because Star Sports are going to have betting up in the NI elections, if not by the time, if you're very early on to this week's podcast, very, very shortly. So ahead of the elections anyway, which is exciting news, William.
Yeah, it is exciting news. I think Northern Ireland is like massively undercovered, underappreciated in all sorts of ways. These will be really interesting elections. Lots at stake here, including the possibility of movement with regards to a return to Stormont, of course. And we've got so many things of interest. So it'll be really interesting to see the markets. I've been running over the numbers with a couple of predicted forecasts, and I think, it will be a really interesting election and one with consequences as well.
Roughly, what are your forecasts telling you? Did they tally with mine?
So Sinn Féin top, gaining somewhere between 17 and 25 seats. Really, I think they and the Alliance Party would be the big gainers. Alliance, depending on where you look, because a couple of people have done forecasts. John Tonge and Peter Donaghy. Peter Donaghy has the Alliance Party gaining 18 seats. He's also got the DUP staying roughly the same where they are, which is interesting because, of course, you've got a situation where different parts of that party have different views on whether they want Stormont to return. I've had it told to be basically that some of the MPs are more hardline on Stormont not coming back than the MLAs. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there, and also whether they have a bit of a bleeding of their vote to even more hardcore options in terms of unionism. But Sinn Féin would be the big winners, Alliance would be the big winners. I'd imagine both would be getting double figure gains. I think if I could get 20 gains, I think that'd be a pretty solid night.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Star Sports leading the way with political betting, and it wouldn't be common for Northern Ireland elections, certainly not local elections, to be priced up, and wouldn't actually be popular with some of the hardline unionist brethren who don't like things happening on a Sunday unless you're going to mass, and certainly don't like punting on local elections. And many of those hardline voters will stick loyal to the DUP if they haven't gone over to the traditional unionist voice, another sort of crackpot party as far as I'm concerned. This is, by any standards, by any metric, by any historical narrative, a massive, massive election in the history of Northern Ireland, which itself is give or take 100 years old now, because Sinn Féin, get whatever price you can get on this, Sinn Féin is going to become the biggest party in Northern Ireland local elections for the first time. Michelle O'Neill is effectively the head of the Northern Ireland government by waiting, in the sense that she's waiting to get in as the leader in Stormont, but because the DUP rather has stymied this happening, it is in waiting, and the DUP's intransigence in terms of the protocol and not having Stormont running, I feel, and I certainly think this is going to be the case in many constituencies, is going to result in them being hammered in this poll, because if you are on the ground, and I'm not on the ground, I'm pretty sure people are going to tell you whatever about their loyalties and their religion and whatever else. People are actually fed up of issues such as not being able to get their businesses up and running, problems with Brexit, and the DUP being, I guess, wedded to this stupid idea about the union as opposed to actually a functioning Northern Ireland. And the irony here is that Sinn Féin, which has essentially existed from the get-go to put Northern Ireland out of its existence, now seems more concerned about running Northern Ireland properly than the DUP. Now, the DUP, in terms of its battle with the protocol, will say that it has forced some concessions from Rishi Sunak's government, which is sort of vaguely true, and it has made some ground in terms of its own kind of standing and its intransigence. At the same time, Stormont has been inactive now for so long that so many things haven't happened. As you mentioned, Will, the alliance has grown. In fact, the middle ground has grown more than nationalist votes have grown, because if Sinn Féin does gain in this election, and the forecast would suggest it'll gain in the region of 30%. If it gains, the SDLP is going to suffer. Now, Sinn Féin has put in more candidates in this election and has effectively targeted voters and floating voters at the idea of sort of punishing the DUP for what it's done. But at the same time, the DUP is actually trying to, which isn't inappropriate, what we have, we hold. It's trying not to lose seats, and it's running fewer candidates so that it basically can maximize the result for the election and the people that it has running. So it's a fascinating election, and it's fascinating for me to see that whatever about polls and, it would suggest that Sinn Féin is going to gain. I think it's a massive election for the DUP, because if the DUP really suffers in this election, I think unionist voters have graduated towards other parties. Some of them probably have even gone from the DUP towards the Alliance because they're absolutely fed up with what the DUP is doing. It's obviously had several leaderships in recent times as well. And we shall see. But I think as much as, we've had Sinn Féin dominating the narrative, another thing is that Sinn Féin was very, very, I would say, pragmatic and politically tuned in terms of how it dealt with King Charles' coronation. It's actually come out of this better than the DUP in so many ways, as we know from the infamous love-in between Alex Maskey and Sinn Féin, Michelle O'Neill and the King when they met. I think that might actually help Sinn Féin in the polls, but I think Sinn Féin is going to dominate this election, for better or worse, and I think the DUP will take some big learnings from it, and we will have the markets up in due course, William.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be looking, I think, for either over under or seats won, or the gains and the losses. Just something, by the way, for the number nerds to look at. Right, so in 2019, the DUP had a 71% return rate. To stay at 122 councillors, they will need 80% of their candidates to be elected. For Sinn Féin, they would need 76% of their candidates to be returned to exceed the current DUP numbers. They're currently on 105, so those might be some numbers to watch. But yeah, a moment of real significance. And at the moment, the predicted big winners are set to be Sinn Féin and Alliance.
Yes, indeed. And keep an eye out on Star Sports for those markets. As I say, I'd be really predicting that Sinn Féin will do well. It has a massive, massive electoral team on the ground as well. And that will be key. And it's probably a little bit more difficult for the SDLP and even the UUP on the other side to kind of have people getting out and helping the party get votes because of the malaise that those parties have suffered. The DUP, on the other hand, I think will actually get a lot of backlash on the doorsteps of people who would have long voted for it. Okay, let's go over to Paul, who is in Greece, and Paul referenced the Turkish election just at the start of the show, but this is potentially a new political era in Greece, and we are going to the polls there in terms of the New Democracy making a strong bid for a second term, Conservative Party. Okay, what's going to happen, Paul?
Yeah, before I get to that, just briefly, great stuff on Northern Ireland, Johnny and Will. Brilliant stuff. I mean, just kind of say a couple of things. I mean, because I've not been following that poll-wise, and I haven't seen any markets yet, so I've not really got any betting. But the idea that DUP stands still sounds incredible. You know, the DUP do seem like a completely busted flush as a political party over recent events. So that would be, I would expect them to go down. And also, it is really interesting to see Sinn Féin making this progress because, you know, I can remember this 20 years ago. They were the only party in Britain that was growing, that had grassroots representation, right? There's a lesson there for how to do politics. You just said, you know, they're going to be swamping the, you know, on the ground, right? They've got a massive grassroots presence. Very few political parties have that anymore. It's an old way of doing things, but it still counts, clearly. You could see it from the fact of having their offices in communities. Anyway, leaving that aside.
Just on that, I'm going to speak for Sinn Féin here on because words matter so much in Northern Irish politics. I think Sinn Féin will say in the UK, well, I wouldn't actually say that either, but in the UK it was growing rather than in Britain because it would obviously divorce Britain, the mainland, and the stateless of Northern Ireland. But I agree with Paul on the I cannot see the DUP holding on to its seats here. It's been getting so much negative press, and even if voters don't go to the TUV, I think a lot of them won't turn up, or they'll go to the UUP. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely, and the alliance. So Greece, what you have here is there's a very, very high chance you'll have two elections because as current projections go, it's highly unlikely that any one party is going to be able to form a coalition from the immediate seat totals. Now, the dynamics of this. The in governing party is New Democracy, which we will call a mainstream European Conservative Party. I wouldn't call them the alt-right or anything like that. They are a mainstream pro-Western Conservative Party, and they've been in for 5 years. The main opposition is you would call it left, certainly some people would say hard left, Syriza, who dominated the previous government. And the third main party is PASOK, who we might call mainstream centre-left. Used to be the dominant party on the centre-left, but then Syriza usurped them. There are also lots of small parties, like there's a Communist Party that get about 6% that won't deal with anybody. There is Yanis Varoufakis's DM25, which may get about 4 or 5%. We'll see how many seats it gets. And there's a couple of small fascist parties. But the main dynamic here is New Democracy versus Syriza, because PASOK, as much as people thought that the centre-left were making a resurgence, it hasn't happened. They're stuck on about 10, 11%. Had a scandal in Brussels, which has kind of stalled their return to power. Now, what I can see, Syriza have a ceiling in that way that left parties do. It's around 28%, 30%, right? They're not. I mean, they did fairly well in government, from what I can gather previously. So that isn't so much the toxicity, but I think it's more that the right wing know how to play them. You know, so the leader Tsipras is an atheist, and this is a highly religious Orthodox country. Now, as far as I'm aware, they didn't make much of that in the past. This election, they're all over it. All of the propaganda is, you know, how can you vote for an atheist, etc. Secondly, and with New Democracy, they're behaving like any strong incumbent does, right? They're timing all their announcements for election time. So I just went to get some money at the ATM, and there's a message coming up that, like, you know, if young people buy your first house, take your time-limited offer to get government help buying a house. And they literally have invented a scheme which runs out about a month after the election, right? It's very much like David Cameron's pensioner bonds and all that we've seen in the past. This is how it works. And they are moving slightly up, New Democracy. I think the latest one had 37.5%, which is quite a dominant position. So I just can't see how Syriza can really form a coalition. I don't think, I mean, even, you know, there was that theory earlier in Parliament that Syriza and PASOK could create a left alliance, maybe get Varoufakis's DM25 party in. But I just don't think they're going to have the numbers. And I think that New Democracy, the Conservatives, are going to fall short of a majority, but after a second election or after extensive negotiations, the centre left will back them. There'll be some kind of coalition with them. So, I mean, betting wise, I've priced this up at Bet Online for which party will provide the Prime Minister after the election. And I'm going 7-1 on New Democracy, 4-1 Syriza, 28-1 PASOK. Another relevant market to this that I've created, which I think is very interesting, and I strongly urge other people to follow suit with this, is next world leader to leave, because this is an extraordinary situation.
Not die now, leave.
Leave their post. They could die. That is, I suppose, one means. But now the odds-on favourite, about 4-7, is Alexander Lukashenko, who internet rumours and beyond suggest has been poisoned by the Russians. Right, here's the Belarus.
We don't have Vladimir Putin here to tell us otherwise now. Just to put that out there.
Might be propaganda. Yes, that's right. Both sides. Right, that's one theory. So he is your odds-on favourite, but of course we don't know how long that goes on for, whether he survives, whatever. Right. But besides that, you've got Erdogan, who still has a second election to take place in 2 weeks. I would have said that's an absolute foregone conclusion he will win. You've got Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the New Democracy leader, who could theoretically lose power on Sunday. He's about 7-1. I don't think he will, but you've got Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish leader. Now, they have an election this year, but they haven't given a date yet. Probably happening in the autumn, and he will be heavily odds on to lose. So if you're betting on him, you have to hope all of the others avoid disaster beforehand.
It's the hope that kills you, literally.
It's great. You've also got Netanyahu, who is governing with a wafer-free majority in a crisis, total constitutional crisis there. You've got Putin himself, who, hope springs eternal, it could happen soon. And then you've got, longer shots who still aren't totally safe, like Rishi Sunak, who's got a bit of trouble this week with his far-right challengers. And you've got Joe Biden, who people always want to bet for an early exit, and Justin Trudeau, who is also subject to many rumours that he will stand down early. So I think that's a cracking market, and I advise people to either check us out at Bet Online or copy us.
I mean, William, this is literally the market that keeps on giving. Who needs the NI elections market? Let's get this market on Star Sports.
I do love it. I do absolutely love it. I mean, how far removed is it from the next cabinet minister to leave, which we've had in the past? So, yeah, I'll very much inquire to getting that market up on Star. Now I think about it, actually, I'm a bit upset I didn't think about it previously because it's always going to give you some sort of a chance. Yeah, the Lukashenko stuff was pretty wild. I saw state released media of him at some sort of command center, and his hand looked in terrible shape, and that was the last I've heard on that. But no, I think that's a really, really interesting market, and we're certain to have some really volatile times over the next year or so with leads coming and going.
When you say his hand looked in terrible shape, was it like the footage of like Hitler when he was really, really sick towards the end with his shake, or was it a different thing?
It was totally bandaged, wasn't it, Paul? Like it looked as if he'd had a chunk taken out of it. It was odd because there had been a lot of talk about him being unwell, and people were posting rumors that apparently there was a military plane or whatever carrying him somewhere. So people began to get very interested, as is the norm now, with flights of interest. So yeah, certainly all is not looking very well there.
Yeah, it always goes back to The Simpsons, where obviously, Principal Skinner had been taken in by the mob who forced him to sell pretzels at the school because they'd taken a stake in Marge's business. And with his bandaged hand, he gave her the money, and he said that his injury was from a boating accident. And then there was a laser at his head, and then he promptly left. And literally, that is not actually that far removed from Lukashenko. And Europe at the moment, particularly, and Russia at the moment, particularly if you listen to Paul's conspiracy theories, or more might say realism. And speaking of conspiracy theories and general madness, what is going on in the US since we were last on, Paul? Because I actually can't keep up with Trump and his various criminal kind of accusations.
Well, okay. I mean, there's that. I mean, as I can see, in Georgia, 8 of the fake electors that he was pushing have taken immunity deals with the prosecution. So that looks very grim. And from what I understand, the Jack Smith investigation into classified documents also not even good. You might also have seen that Rudy Giuliani is being sued by his ex-mistress who he was paying with and there are apparently loads of recordings.
If there's one person you don't want to be sued by, it's your ex-mistress. You know?
It really is, yeah. But in which though the bombshell claim is that he and Trump was selling pardons for $2 million. So I wonder, it's only a matter of days before the sort of Trump propaganda machine starts saying, what's wrong with selling pardons? Everyone does it. It's completely normal. What's the point of being president if you can't sell pardons? But, you know, it's another bombshell attack. We also had last week the absolute shit show, a preview of next year, which is Trump on TV, on his town hall, just obliterating the truth, abusing journalists. I mean, it's just going to be horrific next year, you know? I just can't believe that the Republicans or Republican primary voters have gained this out yet. Are they really going to run a year-long campaign of that? Of Trump it was just horrific TV. And it's interesting also that when you look at the viewing numbers, they're not that good. I mean, 3 million, I think it was, which is better than your average night on CNN, but it would be better than your average night. It's absolutely nothing compared to what it was like in 2016, when he was a novel thing. And I'm reminded of the last election and the first debate in which Trump did the same thing. He just spent the entire night shouting over Joe Biden, shouting over the moderator, just putting out ridiculous lies. And it went down terribly. And a key moment in that election campaign for me was really underexplored, was that the reaction to that debate was so horrific for Trump. They did focus groups all over the country of Trump voters even, and people were going, no, that's too much. It's beyond the pale, right? And then the night that was all happening, he got COVID and people just moved on and he ended up doing the later debate. But this is a disaster for them. I just do not believe that, you know, a year of that in an American election campaign is going to be tolerable to voters.
Yeah, William, I don't know. Like, just it's hard to obviously explain how you know, they've gotten into a situation where the best alternative to Trump is DeSantis, who himself doesn't really look like he's going to get the nod, and I just cannot see the Conservatives winning under Trump.
Yeah, I think it's very hard for them to win a general with Trump for all of those reasons. And it was really interesting because there was an article from Axios which sort of did a behind the scenes dig of the town hall, where during the ad breaks, senior staffers, including Jason Miller, who'll be well known to Paul and obviously follow this sort of thing, went and was showing him tweets from figures that he disliked to motivate him and sort of make him angrier and angrier. So he came out and he was even more combative, which worked with the crowd because that's the level of domination he has at the GOP audience. But to the median voter, you know, thinking of a typical American voter first, concern will be economy, etc., sort of making ends meet, etc. You wonder if that's possibly lost its shock value from 4 years ago, and you wonder if that's really attractive. I mean, I take it that, I mean, I know that America is a different, very different sort of political culture to here, but even then, I wonder, will the Trump campaigns lack a policy, basically, or lack of a serious policy offering that's positive, sort of be their undoing when it comes to a head-to-head contest with him and Biden? You know, Biden, obviously, people will say, and I've made this argument lots, oh, he's old, he's weak, he's not as sharp, etc. But if it's sort of a best or least worst option, Biden's got plenty to sell to back it up. Trump, he refers lots to his presidency of 2016, etc., but you get the feeling that a Trump campaign wouldn't be as appealing to sort of people who are in the middle, I think. And that was a really good example of that, because sure, he made news, etc., but it was not something where you felt you were getting a policy option. not something where he made a promise, a catchy campaign promise. It was the old playbook, but is the old playbook a bit worn out?
What else we got, William?
So on the domestic front, it has been, I think you'll all be very pleased and extremely surprised to learn, an absolutely mad week in British domestic politics because of a formerly little known, I must admit, at least to me, think tank called the National Conservatives, who have had a 3-day conference in London. I'm not going to go too much into the claims, etc., that they've made. I'm sure if you're online, thus be watching this, you'll have seen. But it has been some of the most remarkable material I've ever heard spoken openly and with full chest in recent years, even by the standards of, the last decade or so. We've also seen a lot of movement on house building. That's becoming a tier 1 issue now. What are you going to do about house building? Michael Gove is sort of fighting the fight for the YIMBYs on the Conservative side, but Keir Starmer's now moving his tanks onto that lawn. This is important because, thanks to lots of factors, everybody's now feeling the pinch with regards to a lack of housing supply in the UK, whether you're being hit with interest rates for overpriced houses, or whether you're renting, etc. It's a big issue now. So that's really important. And also in the polling, the Lib Dems continue to do pretty well. We're seeing that the sort of 2 to 3% they added in Westminster voting intention recently is staying there. But it seems like people were maybe much ado about nothing with regards to some Labour drops. Their leads are pretty solid. I think they've had a recent best ever with Savanta, and Keir Starmer, whilst not necessarily going up massively, continues to have a pretty solid rating vis-a-vis Rishi Sunak. He's more helped by the Labour brand than vice versa for Sunak, but those numbers stay solid for now.
Briefly, Paul, NatCon, your type of game, this.
Well, this is again, it's laughable. They're gaslighting everyone by calling themselves NatCon because they're part of a global movement. They're identical. They are identical to the American version, which has Viktor Orban as its star speaker, right, and which clearly is a descendant of Vladimir Putin's fascism in Russia. Now, I mean, leaving aside the politics of all that, right, leaving aside that, I think that what we have to take of this is that this is a mortal threat to Rishi Sunak and to the Conservative Party, right? Now, what I think is happening here is, obviously there's lots of reasons people are going to that conference and playing to that gallery, drifting, whatever, belief systems, whatever. But the main thing for me is there's going to be a parade of would-be next leaders, right, who want to inherit the party after defeat in the next election, right? Jacob Rees-Mogg being the most obvious among them. Priti Patel might be another one. Suella Braverman might be another. And they're going to play to this ever more fanatical far-right gallery. Now, what I think that means is that I don't think Sunak is going to turn the polls around soon. I think this stuff goes deep now. And that it's going to be in their interests at some point before the next election to challenge him, just to build their profile, even if it fails. In the same way, I know the old history lesson, we always go back to 1997, but when John Major, before John Major lost that election, he was challenged by John Redwood, who was using it clearly as a sort of vehicle for, like, I will inherit the crown after the election. He tried and failed. But I think that someone like Mogg, who has said he wants to be leader, is interested in running for leader. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a leadership change to Rishi Sunak in the next year, and someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg emerges as a standard bearer. And I know he's an absurd idea to have as a party leader, but I did back him with Star at 101 a few months ago, and I think that's value. I've actually got 4 people quickly in mind for the next Tory leader at the moment. James Cleverly, 12 to 1, really like that. Priti Patel, but the odds have come down. I got her 80, she's come right down. Jacob Rees-Mogg, and the other one is Gillian Keegan, who is 80 to 1 on Betfair, not listed with Star at the moment, so she'll get big odds on her.
Jesus Christ Almighty! That's two of the grimmest moments I think of the polling. Back in Priti Patel and Jacob Rees-Mogg coupled, the evil hedging. Best of luck with that, Paul. I mean, if it doesn't work out for your politics, it's good to have a few quid in the bank. I did like Paul's thinly veiled. I have money in my bank account as well earlier, where he was able to go to the ATM machine, which not all of us at all times are capable of. Yes, that was the polling station. Thanks so much to William Kedjanyi for getting the good people at Star Sports to put up odds on the local election in NI. As I said at the outset of the show, I think it's going to be a historic, seismic election. I think it's not going to be good for the DUP. Play high on Sinn Féin, play low on the DUP. On the middle ground, I'm not so sure. And the middle ground effectively now includes UUP, SCLP and Alliance. As far as I'm concerned, despite the movements in Northern Ireland politics in recent years. Thanks to Paul as well, basking in the sultry heat of Rhodes. Thanks to William. We'll be back next week when I think Sinn Féin will top the poll in the local elections.
We are right in the heart of Mayfair, 36 Curzon Street, next to the famous Curzon Cinema. Across 2 floors, you can find 2 price finders, 5 digital form touchscreens, and a 38-screen customisable high-spec TV system. Myself and my team would love you to come and join us at Curzon Street and check out what we've got.